Hey Detoxers, welcome to a special episode of the Disinfo Detox. Today I am joined by Daniel Anderson, professor and director of the writing program at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Daniel Anderson, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Thank you, Nolan. I'm happy to be here, and thanks to Sydney and others for putting this together. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sydney and I definitely wanted to get you on the show. I think some of the work you do is very fascinating and relevant at this time. So I want to talk to our audience about it. But I imagine our audience out there is kind of thinking a few things. Why do we have someone on the program who's the director of a writing program? And, increasingly folks are using AI more and more. So they may be asking, why do we have to still learn writing? So Daniel, what's the reason you would say why it's still important to learn writing and teach writing?
Yeah, I could go on for a while, Nolan, but I mean, one of the things I think you'll hear this phrase in the context of AI. People will say we need AI literacy, but people won't really know what that means. And if you really think about what is literacy, literacy comes from a linguistic space. It has to do with reading and writing. So the fact that people apply that term literacy to everything, finance, health, AI, it just tells you how deeply rooted we are in these processes of reading and writing. And so, if you don't have that fundamental capacity to process knowledge using words, to communicate with words, all of the helpful tools and training wheels of AI are going to be kind of attached to nothing. You need to have that literate background going on, and you develop that through learning to read and write. So, and there's a lot of AI writing that happens too. Even when you're prompting, you hopefully are thinking and using language. So, I think it's as important now as ever.
Okay, I totally agree with you, and I've kind of tried to make the same case, particularly to young people. I think we're at an interesting time. The class of 2026 is going to be the first college class who had AI from freshman, well, so-called AI. We can talk about that later, but have had so-called AI from their freshman year through their senior year. And there's a lot of concern that the youths, these youngsters, are using AI too much and not getting these skills. So can you kind of talk about, as someone who works in writing and works with colleagues who teach writing and works with students who are taking writing courses, what's sort of been the role of AI? Has it been disruptive? Have you noticed problems? What are the conversations been like? What can you tell us?
Yeah. I don't know if disruptive is the right word. It's becoming a little bit more disruptive than it was in the first couple of years that it rolled out, but I think it's illuminating, or it distills things in certain ways that make you focus on them. So, I think AI has been a wake up call for educators. And that has to do with the originality of your assignments and what you're actually asking students to do and to accomplish. So if you're asking them to do something that's kind of repetitive or rote, or that can be, responded to with a very simple AI prompt, then that's maybe a spur to look at what you're doing. Are there ways that you can bring in more, of their personal experience, or get them to do some primary research that AI can't really know about or account for? So when you start to adjust assignments and processes to respond to what's been happening in the last couple of years, I think it's a nice refresher, and actually, gives us a check that we can probably update some of the ways we've been processing things, and that's helpful. So I think that's a positive way of looking at it. There are these other concerns. There are some immediate challenges that have to do with misinformation and bias, and obviously academic integrity, but all of those have always been with us. And this has kind of distilled things, and made us have to be a little bit more deliberate, hopefully.
A good point. And at the beginning, I asked you about kind of the techno utopians, the folks who are using AI and think we don't need some of these skills that we previously had to develop in education. Let me flip to the other side. What do you say to folks out there who are, just trying to avoid AI? That sort of their answer is to totally avoid it, for whatever reason. What do you say to those folks in terms of, do you think that there is some place for AI and that understanding AI is important? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like any blanket move like that can be um, an invitation can be given to lift up the blanket in certain parts and see what works. And, without doing like a gotcha game, you could already tell almost anyone that they're using AI when the lane change assist on their car kicks in or something like this. You're already kind of surrounded and using it. But I totally respect those parameters when someone wants to draw some boundaries. And if I'm journaling or I'm looking for a kind of stream of conscious poetry writing, there's certain areas where you want to firewall that off and say, no, we don't. I don't want any AI in this part of my life. So I think that's where developing a kind of literacy and fluency with AI is really the next step. When is it useful for me, and when is it kind of damaging to the mental work that I'm trying to do? So you're not going to get that by burying your head in the sand. You're going to get that by trying it, experimenting a little bit. And there's so much history of resistance when new technologies come online that you've got to be really balanced, because you could just say, well, that history means you should just lean into technology 100% because, back to Plato and everything else, they had it wrong. Technology didn't ruin society. It's all good. We don't want to be there. We want to take the sort of like cautionary flag that's being waved and see, you know, what are they right about and where can they grow a little bit maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've drawn a similar conclusion, and to your point about AI already being used in like lane changes. I mean, it's integrated in everything. I'm surprised how many educators I talk to say they're avoiding it, but it's already integrated in things like Canvas and email and other learning management systems that folks are using. And kind of my concern is that there's a lot of great minds who are critical of AI, and I would like to see them kind of apply those critical skills to AI so we could learn more about it. But a lot of those folks with critical perspectives seem to be avoiding it, and I kind of wonder, what we're missing in that regard. But let me shift gears on you because your research, in addition to writing, you also talk about wellness, and a lot of our audience may not kind of understand the concept of wellness. Can you kind of explain what wellness is and then how you approach it as a researcher?
Yeah, I've been approaching it from the language angle. So, my training is in rhetoric and I focus a lot on digital rhetoric. So, the research methodologies are very much what you might expect someone working in an English department. Let's look at the language that's being used around wellness and see what patterns we can find, see, what kind of storytelling moves there are, and use those to understand, I guess, just the dynamic of how people are communicating with wellness. How can we be kind of more critical consumers of the messages that are coming across? So it's literacy, looking at the ways people write and speak about wellness. And so I've been doing that, and I'd like to do that with wellness books, with the writing that has been around for hundreds of years around wellness, but also in social media spaces there's a whole bunch of new kinds of communication, and that has to do with mixed media, images, sounds, words all coming together around wellness. So it's a really rich space to practice this idea of analysis based on messages, communication, language, as well as media.
So how would you kind of define wellness for someone who maybe has never heard that term before?
Yeah, it's really tough, Nolan, because there's a lot of different genres of wellness. I think we're kind of painting with a broad brush when we say wellness. There are these coaching genres. There's a lot of spirituality oriented wellness. There's science writing around wellness. Obviously, diet and body and health is a big area. Relationships is another huge area. So, if you went on the bookshelf, there could be a shelf for each of these different genres. So that's the first thing is, understanding there's a lot of commonality among these genres, but also you need to be granular and think through, what do I mean by wellness? And then, in general, I think there's two broad areas, and one is sort of like helping people with challenges. So, you're struggling, here's some responses, here's some explanation for what's going on. And then the other half has been kind of moving toward, thriving or optimization. You want to be happier. You want to have, get the most out of life. So there's these two formulas. One is sort of a corrective aspect of wellness, and another is this sort of optimization aspect. And obviously some books or writers are looking at both of those, or some techniques or strategies help with both of those, but that's a broad way. There's a lot of genres, and it's helping people who are struggling, and also trying to help people find the very best path through life.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about a lot in this program is we talk about the influence of the for-profit model, particularly on the way information flows. And there's been a lot of criticisms in the social media space about the ways in which people have kind of co-opted concepts of wellness to enrich themselves, often not serving the user with any actual wellness. So I wonder if you can kind of take us through your perspective on social media. I mean, are there areas where you think this wellness discourse has been a net positive for users? And then what are some of the areas you're concerned with as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, the everything associated with the internet has this double-edged nature to it. And I think, you could go back to even the early 90s when the web was taking off and people were waving pom-poms about the democratization. And then a few years later, they were putting up red flags saying, wait a minute, now anyone can say anything. So, the same phenomenon of anyone can say anything is like celebrated, and then kind of, hands start wringing at the same time about that. I think that holds true for wellness discourse online too. There's a democratization. Anyone can now get to some really great advice. If you can't line up something, you can probably find this advice online. But by the same token, you still need to be able to be critical about it and find out if it's trustworthy and all of that. And then I don't think this is just wellness discourse. I think this is anything. If you were, talking about woodworking or bird watching and trying to get that word out online, it just starts participating in the media ecosystem online, where people are trying to get clicks, they're trying to get likes, and there's a whole bunch of sort of strange dynamics. It gets ironic with the wellness discourse. In a class this summer, we were studying detox messages, like, social media detox, and there were a whole bunch of wellness messages posted about how you can detox and unplug, but ironically those are all posted on social media. So there's this whole kind of like snake eating its tail thing with all of this discourse. And people, you almost just have to participate in that. It's the price of admission, I feel like. But it's easy to kind of forget that you're in this weird sort of communication space that we're all just learning to navigate, I think.
Yeah, and okay, talk to us about fake news. That's an area of study of mine and a lot of focus of this show. So I don't know, call it disinformation, misinformation, what you will. What are some of the patterns and trends you're seeing in the wellness space with in terms of disinformation and misinformation? Just some things that maybe people want to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, the main thing I think is you're getting a lot of partial information. And that's one thing I've noticed in all of this kind of wellness writing. Even, scientists who've done really detailed studies, as soon as they try to turn it into a message for a popular audience, it has to be sort of simplified a little bit. So, people will talk about rewiring the brain, and there's, no doubt some really complex scientific work that's been done, but eventually it boils down to this idea that you can rewire your brain. And people are going to come across these messages. But, how do you get down to the next level of what do I really do, or what does that mean? So there's a lot of figures of speech. There'll be, messaging that doesn't really deliver the science, but feels like it does. Or another thing that people will do is they'll cherry pick. There'll be a study, 80% of people who went walking in the woods for therapy had an improvement over the people who weren't walking in the woods. But, it's one study, and we don't know how many people there were. So, everything gets kind of simplified and distilled. And so I don't think this is necessarily misinformation as just, like partial information, or it's a prompt for viewers and readers and participants to dig a little deeper. Or I don't know, maybe not 100%. Sometimes if something makes sense to you and you say, yeah, I felt that too. When I went walking in the woods, it was better. And so maybe that is just what you need, a prompt to sort of like change your habit and behavior. And if it works for you, then that's fine too. But you need to test it with your own personal experience. Or if you're going to turn it into some kind of claim that you're arguing has, some deep academic rigor, then you got to go a couple more steps to make it work.
And I've been following very closely these stories about these companies that are popping up that are promising to be able to address folks' mental health issues through AI therapy. And, we've seen, shall we say, mixed results at best from some of these things. I wonder, as someone who's in this space, kind of what you make of this. Does this fit into kind of the larger trends around wellness in the digital space? Do you have any kind of warning signs or things we should think about in terms of folks who are relying on AI for mental wellness?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably respond to that by going back to the AI concerns and issues in some ways. The people who are worried about AI, beyond the plagiarism and the kind of surveillance things that kick up with AI, people are worried about the link between thinking and writing that could disappear when people start using AI. And people are worried about anthropomorphizing AI and kind of losing that sense of what's the difference between a human and a machine. And that's a complicated question because, if any of us have even eyeglasses or a hearing aid or something, you are somehow augmenting your humanity with technology, and you're always doing that. But generally, we are aware of that boundary, or we pay attention to that boundary. And so when that goes away, I think that's probably the biggest concern. If it's spirituality or wellness or psychotherapy, and we don't have that understanding that what I'm getting, if I know I'm getting information from a computer and I approach it that way, that makes really good sense. If I think there's somebody here who's going to be empathetic and challenge me and connect with me on a human level, that's not what the AI is doing right now. And if it ever even did that, you'd have to watch out because someone would have programmed that into the AI. What if the person who set up the patterns and trained the AI didn't understand deeply about trauma, or had this particular bias on it or something? So, I think it goes back to AI literacy in a lot of ways. If you can get some helpful information about something that's bothering you on AI, then maybe it's useful. But if it's this human connection that you're looking for and you think that's what you're getting, then you probably need to use caution.
Daniel Anderson, this has really been interesting and fabulous. Can you tell people where they can follow your work or any work you want to recommend they access?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram, where I'm studying wellness, it's I am up and open is my handle on Instagram. And then my website is iamdan.org. So those are two good places to look for me.
Absolutely. Daniel Anderson, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox.
You're welcome, Nolan. Thanks so much.
All right. And thank you, Detoxers.